here's the question that I believe God's asking us every single day. Where have you come from? And where are you going? What is your identity? And what is your destiny? Where are you hiding in your fear, guilt, and shame? Are you going to move forward in that? The foundational prayer for Jews, hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one. It's that word H-E-A-R, to hear, Shema. And there's a famous person in Scripture, I say famous, a prominent character in Scripture from Genesis 16, whose their name is that root word Shema, and it's the person of Ishmael. And we don't think of him too much. He's one of Abraham's sons. When we think of Abraham's sons, we think of Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And sometimes we forget about Ishmael because Sarah's not his mother. The maidservant, Hagar, is his mother. But this is a great story of naming and freedom and identity. And there are two big questions here that the Lord asks Hagar, and I think those questions he's asking us every day. So let's look at that story and find out what those questions are. I think you know the backstory. Abraham, actually at this point, there's still Abram and Sarai, are barren. Abram's left his family. He's gone to the land that God will show him. He's promised to be the father of many nations. Yet here they are. Scholars believe at this time Abram is about 86 years old. And I'm in Genesis 16. And Abram's about 86 years old. And so Sarai's about the same. She's been barren her whole life now. She's past childbearing age, and she's getting a little bit impatient. And so she comes up with this great plan. Here's just an example of how hard it is for us to trust the Lord. You know, hearing from God is not this exact science. Even these great founding fathers of our faith, founding fathers and mothers, sometimes doubted. You know, I think we think that they were just perfect, but sometimes they even doubted, is it God? Is it not God? Is this really going to work out for my benefit? And so Sarah kind of takes things into her own hands and decides that she is going to give her maidservant to her husband, and maybe the maidservant will produce the child. In that culture, that was a very common practice, so it wasn't shocking, and that child would be considered Sarai's child because she owned Hagar as a slave. She owned her, and so the child would be actually Sarai's possession. So she comes up with this great plan. She initiates the plan. The plan works. Hagar becomes pregnant, and now every time Sarai looks at Hagar, as Hagar's belly's getting bigger and bigger, greater and greater with child, Sarai becomes more and more jealous. And so the plan is physically working out, but emotionally it's backfiring. And instead of feeling this great satisfaction, she is overcome with negative emotion and jealousy, as we said. So now the child is born, Hagar's pregnant, and she flees out into the desert because Sarai's mistreating her, and there is so much animosity and conflict in the household that Hagar just can't take it any longer. And so she flees out into the wilderness, and she's there in the wilderness. And the scripture tells us in verse 7 that the angel of the Lord, who is the Christ, the angel of the Lord comes and finds her sitting in her pain and her sorrow, in her fear, in her guilt, in her shame. And the angel of the Lord pursues her and finds her. And so I just want you to think for a minute about your fear and guilt and shame. And are you running from your difficult circumstances? and to remember that you're not alone and that God is not just like leaving you out there to get it all together and then you can come to him with whatever's bothering you. No, he's a rescuer. He is our rock, our strong tower. He pursues us just like he did Adam and Eve. There it is. In the very beginning, he's setting the standard. When they were hiding in their shame, he pursued them. He went to find them. Same thing. He goes to find Hagar in her affliction. And in verse 8, it says that he says, Hagar, Sarai's maid. And in that one sentence, it says it all, because this is 16 chapters after Eve. And this is the first woman that God mentions by name since that time. He calls her by name and she recognizes that it's the Lord because he uses her name. Name and identity is so important to God. And she recognizes that it's God pursuing her, finding her, seeking her out. And he says to her, Hagar, and here's the question that I believe God's asking us every single day. Where have you come from and where are you going? What is your identity and what is your destiny? Where are you hiding in your fear, guilt, and shame? Are you going to move forward in that? Do you know your identity? Are you going to continue walking in that false identity? Are you going to stay in the wilderness? Because you do have a choice. And this is what he's asking you. In verse 8, what are you running away from? And she answers, I'm running away from my mistress. Because how is her mistress making her feel? She's a slave. She's trapped in that slavery, in that false identity. And she doesn't want to be in that fear, guilt, and shame. So she ran away. So ask yourself that question. Where have you come from and where are you going? Are you coming from an impossible situation in a false identity? Are you trying to escape it in your own human means? And then in verse 9, that same angel of the Lord, the Christ, says something surprising. Go back to your mistress and submit to her authority. We don't expect that. We think God's just going to pluck us out of our situation and put us into the party, into La La Land, and make everything wonderful and beautiful. But the scripture tells us in this world we will have suffering. And walking with Jesus doesn't always look like the great party. Sometimes it's difficult. All of us face difficult circumstances, but sometimes those difficult circumstances end up being the very best thing for us and are the means to the best outcomes. So in Isaiah 43:1, the verse that I love so much about identity, Jacob is undergoing this name change from Jacob to Israel. And in the very next verses, it says, I'm changing your name because so you'll know you belong to me. Because when you go through suffering, the fire, the flood, you will know that I am with you. So suffering looks very different when we know we belong to God and we know that we're with him. And this is what's happening with Hagar. I'm with you. I call you by name. You don't have to wallow in fear, guilt, and shame. Go back and submit to your mistress because it's going to look different this time. So then here's the promise. Go back to her, and this is what I promise you. That you are bearing a son. You are now with child, and you shall call his name. Here it is. That subject of identity comes up again. You shall call his name Ishmael. Ishmael means God hears, because the Lord has heard you. He's paid attention to your affliction. This is a great blessing to Hagar. He's saying to her, I'm calling you by name, and I'm giving your son a name. I have heard you now. Stop running away in a false identity as slave. Go back in your true identity, and you're bearing a son, and go back and bear that son in his true identity. This is astounding news. For one reason, there are only 7 birth announcements in the entire Bible. One of them is Isaac, one of them is Solomon, one of them is Jesus. There's only 7. It's shocking, I think, that one of them is Ishmael. We don't expect this. Ishmael's the father of the Arab nations, and he gets one of these 7 birth announcements. And in his true identity, his mother is not a slave. That's a false identity. Go back. Your son is going to be a blessing. And because you are bearing that son, you are also a blessing. So here's that idea of naming again. Ishmael, it means God hears. And then he goes on and promises her. It says in verse 20, and this is where looking up verses, there's a great resource called blueletterbible.com to see what the real meaning of the words are in the original language. Because we read this in English, it says Ishmael means God hears and he will be a wild donkey of a man. Well, in English, in 2025, that doesn't sound so great. To us, that means he's going to be a crazy man, right? But in those times, in that culture, that means he's going to be free. Do you know what good news that is to a slave woman? That her son is going to be free? That's like saying to a prisoner, your son is going to be a soaring eagle. That's what that would mean in our culture in this day and age. Your son is going to be free. And then it also says that his hand will be against everybody else's hand. Well, we think that means fighting. But in that day and age, it means like to shake hands, that he will be in agreement. He will be friends with. He will do business with everyone. So to sum it all up, these themes of identity and destiny and submitting to God, even when we think that it might be negative, are so important to understand it in the long run. God always has the big plan in mind. Sometimes we just are so focused on the here and now, in our pain, in our affliction, that we have to see with the eyes of our heart what God is doing. And so in this story, we often think that it's about Isaac. And later, it's actually about 12 years later, Sarah does have a son of her own, and his name is Isaac. And the covenant that God makes for Sarah and Abraham to be the parents of a great nation, Israel, does come through that son Isaac. But Ishmael receives the blessing of that covenant. He is the son of blessing. And he also is the father of a great nation, it says in Scripture. So as we wrap this up about Hagar, remember the most important things. God pursues you in your pain and your affliction. He doesn't want you to be in the wilderness of fear, guilt, and shame. He wants you to know your true identity. And sometimes when he leads you out of the wilderness, he might lead you back to a place that's surprising to you, that's not exactly your dream situation, but it's because he has the end in mind and he knows what's best for you. And so trust his goodness in that. Trust the end of the story. And the most important thing is that when you know your true identity, it always leads you to belonging, that anchor of belonging with God, and it will always lead you to freedom and blessing. So God bless you as you take this to heart.